Welcome. My name is Jason King, and I'm your host for today's special version of NPR Music's Pop Talks Conversation series. Today is the closing keynote session for the Pop Conference. And by way of introduction, the Pop Conference is the premier pop music writing conference in the world, brought to you by Seattle's Museum of Pop Culture. The conference this year focused on the theme of youth, and for the first time, we ran the conference virtually. The Pop Conference could not have happened this year without our sponsor, Critical Minded. Critical Minded is an initiative to invest in cultural critics of color, co-founded by the Nathan Cummings Foundation and the Ford Foundation. We want to thank them very much. All right, so I am overjoyed to introduce the closing keynote, and who better to close out the leading pop music conference than one of our leading global pop music superstars, Dua Lipa. Welcome, Dua.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure. So nice to see you again, although virtually.
Absolutely.
I'm so happy we're doing this.
Yeah, thank you. For the sake of viewers who are uninitiated to the Dua Lipa experience, I don't know who out there could possibly be uninitiated to your experience at this point. Even my mother, who doesn't listen to a lot of pop music, when I told her I was doing this, she's like, Dua Lipa? I was just listening to Dua yesterday. So you've reached, your popularity has reached far and wide. But I want to give a little bit of bio just to give a sense of the scope of what we're talking about here. So you released your first singles in 2015, and since that time, you've risen to the level of being one of the music world's most electrifying superstars. Your self-titled debut album broke streaming records and did so on the success of singles like the anthemic New Rules. In 2019, you picked up 2 Grammys, including the coveted Best New Artist. Your second studio album, Future Nostalgia, was released this year and features songs like Don't Start Now, Physical, and so on. And for my mind, they capture the sound of musical exhilaration. You also just released the ecstatic Club Future Nostalgia Remix album in collaboration with the DJ The Blessed Madonna, featuring guest contributions from legends like Madonna, Missy Elliott, remix contributions from everyone from Masters at Work to Yeji. I'm telling you, your albums have been the soundtrack to my pandemic blues, and I thank you, even though my downstairs neighbors probably do not. So,
well, it's an honor. I'm so happy to hear that. That was my main reason for putting out an album at this time, and I'm just so happy that the response has been that way, and it's given people a little dance party in their kitchens. Although at home, hopefully, I brought the party to you.
You did. I think you did. So let's actually talk about that. So one of the ways I think about the album that you released this year is that it's kind of neon in the midst of what could otherwise be very dark times, right? And I just wanted, obviously you couldn't have anticipated a pandemic that would race across the world.
Yeah.
But just tell me about the thinking about creating an album that's so carefree, that's full of fun, and such abandon at a moment that is so dark.
Well, I guess, I think like everyone else, I never thought in a million years I'd be going through something like this in my lifetime. I never thought while I was creating this record that I wouldn't get the opportunity to tour it and to do performances the way that I would want to, and that the world would just, completely change. And it's been an incredible learning experience, I want to say. I feel like it's taught me so much patience during this time, because so much of my life has been up till now. It's like, what's next? What am I doing? Where am I flying to? What's, the next video I'm shooting? And I think it's really given me time to really soak in all the music and the experience in itself. And I'm really proud of myself with this record, because I feel like I really found my feet as an artist and as a songwriter. And I feel like all I have ever wanted as a musician is to grow and mature and learn from my experiences. And for that, regardless of the fact that maybe I can't tour it at the moment, I'm still very grateful for the experience and the recognition and the response from all the fans and the listeners, and that makes me incredibly happy. Although of course it was scary when it came to the point of releasing a record, and we were just in the midst of, especially in London, just about to go into lockdown. It was very surreal promoting my record from my sofa, and I was like, okay, this is not how I imagined things to go. But it you know, it made me think outside the box. It made me want to create like different experiences, come up with different performances, figure out a way that we can still show togetherness when we're all so far apart. And that's been challenging, but also really exciting during this time.
So tell me more about that, because I've been fascinated by what I perceive as the kind of excellence and execution of your projects this year. So not only musically, but also all the visuals, the videos, everything, in the midst of a time in which a lot of people, for professional and personal reasons, have disbanded things or kind of fallen apart, and rightly so, because we're in the middle of multiple crises.
Yeah.
It feels like your project has been very driven, really well executed, and you sort of moved forward when you could have said, you know what, let's wait for another year, like a lot of people have. Can you talk to me about the kind of decision-making process behind that, to just go forward?
Yeah, it was, you know, I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't thinking for a second that maybe it wasn't a good idea to put it out at this time. But I also, you know, I went back to the reason why I created this record and why it is so like fun and uplifting, and it was to really get away from anything that was going on in the outside and anything that was happening, you know, beyond your four walls or within your like circle of friends, and any like outside opinions or energies or whatever that may be for anybody, and especially for the listeners. But for me, during that time, I wanted to just create something that felt really authentic and honest and fun to me. And I feel like there was also a lot of pressure riding on me at one point, where everyone was like, okay, second album, you really have to buckle up and show people that you deserve to be here. And that pressure, I feel like, was another thing that I wanted to push aside and be like, I don't want to think about that, because then I feel like I would get into a vicious cycle of trying to recreate the success of the first record. But I just want to go in and go with my heart and create an album that I feel played on essentially a memory when of growing up. You know, it was music that was constantly being played around the house, and music that my parents listened to, and that whenever songs from like Jamiroquai or Blondie or Moloko or Prince or whoever would be playing around the house, even to this day, when those songs come on, it gives you such a joyful, exciting feeling that you're like, God, this song is so good. And like, how can I create that feeling with a modern twist? And that was kind of how Future Nostalgia came about. And I was like, because of all those things that happened in the process while creating this record, it felt like it made sense to put it out during this time.
So one of the things I think about Future Nostalgia and also the remix album is that they're both trans-temporal. And that's just a scholarly academic word for something that spans decades, spans across time. When I listen to the record, I mean, you know, there's 1950s on there in terms of the artwork on the cover. There's 1930s in terms of the Alboli horn sample, right? There's like 70s, like, you know, pristine disco on there. There's 80s, there's 90s, Jamiroquai, there's 2000s, Gwen Stefani. So it spans a lot of eras. In Excess, Madonna, I get all of those influences. Can you just talk about that for a second? Is there some sort of desire to create this sort of like trans-temporal experience where people can, it's almost like sampling from any era?
So any era, I think it was just mainly going off like inspiration, things that felt good. And it just so happened that I feel like we touched on pretty much every era possible with this
literally
record. And I think that's also the beauty of it. It's kind of bringing something that feels almost so like you already know it, but it's still something new and fresh. And that was the main basis of it. I think when I start off with ideas, they're always very broad, and even with the record, it's very, very broad in the sense of touches on so much nostalgia, but then it's the essence of the production that makes it current, and even like the lyrical content and what I'm talking about, and those things are very current or even future in my life. Like some of them are even manifestations, and like in Love Again, I was just manifesting this love into my life, and those are all kind of the future element to it. So it's really putting those two things together that made it really exciting.
Are you a nostalgic person at all?
Yeah, I am. I mean, I you know, whether it's like a food or a scent or a song, mainly it's music that really hits me with nostalgia, because it immediately takes me back to where I was when I first heard that song, or whether it's like driving down with like my family, whether it was to school or whether it was to like a little trip to the beach or whatever it was. It's just like those little moments in my life that like pinpoint so much of like my inspiration, or making up dance routines in the playground, or singing in the living room, and just like using little encyclopedias as props to dance with. It's just like all kinds of random things that I take so much inspiration from.
I mean, when I first interviewed you a few years ago for NPR, I think about 4 years ago now, and we talked a little bit about your childhood, and I bring this up because the conference theme is youth this year. Yeah. And we talked about some of the music that was really inspirational to you growing up, and I remember at the time you mentioned Pink, Nelly Furtado, Toni Braxton,
My
all
queen.
of them. But some of the music here is 80s, and it's before you were born, and even some of the 90s references are from before you were born. So some of that is, I assume, from your parents' collection or from friends.
It's all really from my parents that I feel like I've like claimed as my own childhood inspirations, you know. It's music that I feel like I've been so lucky to have been introduced at such a young age, that you could play these songs and I can just sing along to them and sometimes not even know what song it is, you know, until later on when I become more inquisitive and want to find out more. But at the time it was just something that felt good, something that I could sing along to, but it's all really thanks to my parents.
So I just want to talk about the writing process. Knowing that you have a title, Future Nostalgia, you started with the title and then you kind of worked backward to make the record. Can you walk me through the writing process of how you merge together these different stylistic influences from the past, but then also try to create something new from a writing perspective?
Yeah, I think, you know, every session and every day I went into the studio was a completely different story, but I know that every single session ended up with a whole, everybody dancing in the studio and having a good time. Whether those songs went on the album or not, it was always like a feel-good vibe. I guess I would start with I think with this record in particular, like I would go into the studio and just kind of drive the session and be like, okay, today I'm feeling like I want to make something 80s and really flash dancey, which got someone like Jason Evigan, who I did Physical with, really excited. And he was like, all right, flash dance, let's go, let's do it. And everything starts in a very nostalgic way, in the sense of like the music feels nostalgic, and then even like the lyrics like that I wanted to put into Physical, it's like, you got me feeling diamond rich, and I feel like even the intonation and the way that I said it felt very nostalgic. But then there are certain elements in the production which I think like the more electronic side, I wanted it to be as organic as possible in terms of production, especially after touring for so long with my first record. I realized that that was something that I missed in my first album. I wanted this one to be at the forefront. I wanted it to be very musical and organic, and then to add like the electronic side that made it sound more futuristic. And it's kind of, you know, a merging of energies and everybody in the room. But I felt like I had to, you know, I have to always be the first person to come in with the idea and know what I want to say, because that's the only way that I was going to get songs. And this time around, you know, creating this record, I felt like things happened a lot faster because I felt like I knew what I wanted, but I also wasn't afraid of my own thoughts. I also wasn't afraid to be vulnerable. I wasn't afraid to, like, I felt like so much of my first record, I spent time going into studios trying to prove to people that I can write, you know. So I would always go in with like, I have to be really good and I always have to do this. And because that weight has kind of lifted off my shoulders, because I got to work with a lot of the same people, it made the energy a lot easier for me to just come in and write things from the heart that were very honest and very real to me. And the process was just fun, you know, especially with something like Physical. It was very much just like throwing ideas with my friends who I wrote it, Coffee and Sarah and Jason, and we were just like basically like free flowing with funny but on the nose, cheeky like lyrics, especially with the "who needs to go to sleep when I got you next to me," and then like it feels nostalgic, but then it's also something that people haven't really heard from me before, and kind of makes it new and futuristic. And
there's a really interesting book by the writer Simon Reynolds called Retromania, and he talks about how pop music is kind of addicted to the past, which, and I don't want to paraphrase from him, but he essentially argues that that's kind of a negative thing, and that pop music should be looking forward to the future as opposed to just continually looking back. But maybe the reason that pop music has been looking back for so long is because we've been in a kind of YouTube era where all culture is sort of available to us and we can pick and choose from different eras and so on. But it's interesting that the album is called Future Nostalgia because it's a marrying of the future and the past together, and maybe you're seeing it as more of a circle than a kind of line.
I think it depends. I think one thing as an artist, like I said earlier, the thing for me, not in the sense of like being stuck in the past and in the sense of going into the retro style, what was for me was not getting stuck on basically trying to recreate new rules or trying to recreate that that song. And
was there pressure to do that from anyone, like label, etc.?
No pressure from anyone, but because the song did well, I was like, well, maybe that's what the people want, and that's what I should be making. And I think that's when I realized that it's just like that's how I'll never grow if I start chasing the success of another song. I believe that every song needs to live on its own, and you need to constantly progress. In the sense that I think pop music is stuck in the past, I don't know if I believe that. I think there are lots of trailblazers that are just constantly creating so much incredible new music. And that's so inspiring and different. And alongside that, even in other fields, not in pop, there's so much inspiration to be had and so much music. But I do believe that art also, like in fashion, like in music, like in everything, things always come back in a different way. But I think everything has that future nostalgia element that everybody's recreating it in a new, fresher way, like reimagining those styles. So then that to become like the new thing, I suppose. So it's a bit of both, I don't blame him for thinking that, because I also understand his perspective, but I think it's very much a bit of both.
Let's stay with the theme of youth for a second and age. So you're in your mid-20s, you're born in 95, sorry to, it's out there, so it's not like, hello. So mid-20s now. So for some, the 20s is a decade where you're kind of searching, where you don't have it all figured out and you're sort of grasping to try to make a sense of yourself. For others, it's a decade where you try to get things done. But you think of all the great albums that were made by people in their 20s, whether you're talking about Freddie Mercury or Lauryn Hill or Amy Winehouse and so many others. To whatever extent you can kind of self-reflect on it. And I can imagine it might be difficult because you're in your 20s while you're trying to self-reflect on this. Does it mean something to you to be like releasing music now at this age?
I don't know how to answer that, I guess. I'm so, at least I think, quite driven, and I'm very much about constantly working and putting something out and, being creative and creating new things and learning. That's the most important for me, is like I constantly want to be learning and I constantly want to be progressing. And yeah, maybe it's the kind of fire and the fuel that you have in your 20s and you just want to keep going. But I'm also so in love with my job and with I get to do my hobby every single day, and that's also a massive driving force for me, that I'm so passionate and I just want to keep going. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to keep going while I have the energy, and I'm just going to do it until I literally fall.
Where does that work ethic come from?
It really comes from my parents. I've my whole life I've watched my parents work non-stop. At the same time as like raising a family, showing me the importance of like working. They've always had a crazy work ethic, and that's definitely rubbed off on me. Yeah, I love to work. I've always loved to work. The second I was allowed to work, I was working. And so, yeah, it's just very much instilled in me.
I want to ask you about dancing. Oh, sorry, say that again. You said you're
I'm a bit of a workhorse.
Okay. I think that's a good thing, although some people have been arguing, of course, this year that we should be doing more resting and self-care and those sorts of things. Yeah. I want to ask you about dancing. So obviously this record, you know, the album and the remix album are, I mean, intended to make you, if you don't dance, I don't know, something is wrong with you or something, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're able to.
Purely dancing.
So talk to me about that. I remember seeing a concert of yours in New York, and as soon as the concert was over, Whitney Houston's I Want to Dance with Somebody started playing, and all the young people who were on the dance floor just started going crazy and dancing to it. And I thought, oh, the next record really should cater to that spirit of just wanting to be dancing in this exuberant way. And I feel like you achieved that. But talk to me about your own relationship to dancing. I'm always fascinated by musicians' relationship to dancing that might then inspire them to make music that other people want to dance to.
Yeah, I mean, going back to like ending the tour on Whitney Houston, what a way to kind of keep people going even once the like party is finished. Like the party never stops. The music keeps coming. You just keep doing your thing. And for me, I've always loved dancing since I was a kid, especially when you have no inhibitions and you just kind of go with the flow and everything's just fun and no one's like judging you or whatever. But I think when I was I was touring my first album, I guess I was still kind of going with that very much like energy of a child almost, that I was just dancing on stage as if I was dancing in my own room. And
which was very fun.
Sorry?
It was very fun, by the way.
Very fun. I love to just move. I love all forms of movement, and I love people that can dance. I find it so inspiring and incredible. And you know, I'm not a dancer per se, but I think that was something that I was like, I would love to be really good at dancing. I would love to push myself harder, but I realized that what I needed to do was actually have a lot of time to rehearse and really put on a performance. And for someone who's not a dancer, I needed to work really harder to look good when I'm moving, you know. And I definitely had some criticism, and people were a little bit mean to me online. Definitely
what do you mean?
on me a little bit on social media. And
did you take that criticism seriously, or what did you think of it?
it was more, you know, I'm very good at like laughing at myself also, so it was very much going, oh no, not this again. I was like, this video is coming to haunt me. It was just a very like silly random video. I also feel like a lot of people who didn't know my music or hadn't come to the shows only saw that video and kind of judged me by that one thing. And so I was like, okay, well then I'm just going to take this and better myself and prove people wrong, and I know I can dance and I know I can do this. And I just really I went into it and got really excited at the fact that I also had a lot more time in the process of coming out with this new record, that I had time to go into full rehearsals and really put on good performances. And that was something that I didn't have the luxury of with the first record, because everything kind of happened so fast that I felt like I was on tour, and then it was like, well, you have to do a TV performance, and literally I would have like about an hour and a half before I filmed the TV performance to try and like figure something out. And not only was I like trying to sing, and like obviously everything is live, so I'm like, I'm trying not to hit a dud note, I'm also trying to dance and look cute, I'm also trying to like put on a performance and make it look amazing. I think I found that really difficult, and this time around I was like, okay, I need to 100% make a lot of time for rehearsal, get good at the things I want to be at. You know, I want to be a really good performer. I want to put on a good show. I want to, you know, dance and feel good about it as well. I want to be so confident that then I only need to focus on my singing, because I feel like I can do the routine in my sleep. And that's just kind of how I went about it. And I feel like before the pandemic, I was kind of on a good roll. I felt confident in my movement. I felt good in my performance. I was really kind of coming into myself, and everything kind of stood at a standstill. But I think that was something that really helped and guided me a lot through even the music videos that I've been doing. Like, I spent so much time honing everything in. I feel like this time around, I really have two hands on the wheel, and I'm like, I know what I'm doing. I know this is the way. And it's been an incredible learning experience, and I love it. And I wouldn't have it any other way. You know, maybe if it wasn't for the criticism online, I probably would have carried on just doing the worm or something. So it's great. It's you know, it's all part of the process.
And I was just asking you if you have like club nights that you remember that were fantastic that stuck with you?
Oh,
Were you a club goer? Like, is that?
yeah, I think, I off the record now, joking. I love to go partying. I mean, I worked in nightclubs and then I worked in restaurants in London until I was, well, like 18, 19. So I worked a little bit, probably before I was allowed to work in a club. I worked in a club. Um,
Okay, we'll cut that part. No, I'm joking.
But I used to work in a restaurant in Soho, and that was just before like I got signed. And so whenever I would finish my shift, I would go out with all my friends, and we would all meet up at like midnight, and then go to the club and just dance. And then I would just party until, I don't know, 3 a.m., go to bed, wake up, go to the studio, go to work, do the same thing all over again. And that was pretty much the whole thing, the whole process up until I got signed. And then when I got signed, I was able to quit my job at the restaurant, and I was like, okay, maybe I won't have to come back. And then I took my job really seriously, and I was like, this is just what I want to do. I get to live my dream. And now I go to the club occasionally, sometimes like when my friends are all around, like, or if we're all in one place, like if we're all in London, it's fun to go out sometime. But I'm quite a homebody now. Like, I love to have house parties, more dinner parties that end up into house parties. That's kind of my thing. But I've had so many fun nights out, but they all end up all kinds of crazy. Like friends picking up like stop signs from the street, and you're like running and placing them somewhere else, and it's just too many funny, silly, drunken nights, but they make for good songs.
Tell me about working with the Blessed Madonna. I've followed her work for a while. I've been in Berlin where she's played incredible nights.
Yeah.
I've had amazing club nights. Tell me about where I was really surprised that you were doing a collaboration with her. And then I was pleasantly surprised by the incredible competence of the record. The fact that, you have everyone from Yeji on there to Masters at Work, and then Masters at Work are sampling all these really amazing tracks. I've seen some reviews of the album where clearly the reviewer didn't even know what some of these tracks were, where they came from. So it's such a thoughtful record for people who are real club heads and people who know the history of dance music and house music. There's so much richness there. But talk to me a little bit about that collaboration and how that came to be.
So I met the Blessed Madonna. I met her through Mark Ronson at Glastonbury. She had remixed Silk City, Electricity, our song together, and I just immediately fell in love with her work, and I wanted to know more. And I was just like, she was always someone who was at the top of my list of people to work with, but I didn't know to what capacity we could get together. And I talk so much about the shortage of female producers in general, I think, in the music industry, and how I hadn't up until this point actually worked with a female producer, and how much I had wanted to do something like that. And creating Club Future Nostalgia was really something that happened because of the time that we're in. And I was very fortunate to have had the opportunity to have, the Blessed Madonna and all these artists and producers and animators and everyone be at home during this time. And for this album to really come together, it was something that we could all do, and something that I felt was exciting for the fans. And again, another very big learning experience for me. I knew for a fact that I couldn't do what they do. And so just learning about all these incredible dance songs and inspirations and things behind it, for me it was very much talking about, being like, well, I would love to have Madonna and Missy Elliott on this, and I would love to have Gwen Stefani on it, and Jamiroquai and Nena Cherry, and all these incredible artists that I'm just so in love with and so inspired by, and being able to create or reimagine this record in a club sense. Although we can't go to the club yet, it's another way of being like, I'm bringing the club to you. And it was just such a fun and exciting project to work on, and to create something that also felt quite nostalgic, when artists team up with DJs and producers to create a whole seamless mix of a record. Gave me so much Glastonbury vibe. So I was like, if I go there, I definitely want to start playing the DJ tents and just go and dance around. And it was just really, I felt so lucky. And Maria, the Blessed Madonna, she's incredible. We were constantly on the phone with each other, going back and forth and sending over ideas, and she was sending me stuff, and I was hitting her up going like, okay, maybe this should change, or should we add more like lyrics to this? And somehow combining also the pop world with the dance world, in the sense of some songs were purely more remix vibes with very little very little lyrics or words from the song. And so there was like, I wanted to like trickle in a bit more for my pop fans. And it was interesting to see those two worlds merge and also introduce, you know, my younger audience to maybe some dance tracks that and artists and samples and things that maybe they hadn't heard of. And again, working with female producers and artists like Jada G and Yeji, and you know, all of this is me wanting to just get more into working with so many people from so many different musical backgrounds and styles, and it's been fun, and I'm glad you like it.
How much of it was learning for you? Like, oh, I had never heard of this person before. Thank you for introducing that to me. Or how much of it was you doing the research and bringing it to her? Like, what was the collaborative process like?
I think it was a bit of both. You know, I remember seeing Yeji perform in Brooklyn one time, and my friend Grace actually took me. This was when like Rain Girl was kind of doing its thing. And I just immediately like fell in love with her. I was listening to her project. It was something that I followed for quite a while. And so when this came about, that was something that I was very, very excited about. And I was like, Yeji should do something. And then Jada G is actually a friend of a friend. And I just heard so many incredible things. And then, of course, Joe Goddard and Masters at Work and all these people that I feel like I did all my research from my many years of going to festivals. So it was a bit of both. You know, I was very familiar with everyone on the record, but I hadn't gone into like deep mixes like the Dimitri from Paris mix and all that stuff that I feel like all those things were very much so like a learning curve and so exciting, and to see that all come together was cool.
Before the album even came out, or the studio album, Future Nostalgia, came out, your management had announced there's not going to be any ballads on the album at all. And I was like, whoa, no ballads. Because I've always been really fond.
I think that was their reaction too when I told them there wasn't going to be any ballads. They're like, you sure? I'm like, yep.
So no that came ballads. From you. That came from you.
Yeah.
So what was the thinking there? Because you've done tracks like Be the One, which is not a ballad, but is kind of, you know, lyrical song over a beat, and Thinking About You. And so what was the thinking there?
I think, you know, Love Again kind of has a little bit of more of a singy moment in the record. But to be really honest with you, when I was in the studio, it just didn't come to me. And it's pretty much that, you know, I tried, but I wasn't feeling it. And I was like, I'm not going to force a ballad for the sake of a ballad. Like, if the songs are already like fun and good and I feel confident about them and I love them and they make me happy, then maybe this song is just, you know, the way it is. I do feel like it has peaks and troughs all the way through the record in different ways, whether that's with Pretty Please or Love Again or Break My Heart. It definitely has texture, although it doesn't have the ballad. But yeah, it was purely on the basis that it just didn't come to me.
And if there are folks out there who haven't heard some of those earlier songs, I encourage them to take a listen, because they showed another side.
We will have some new songs coming soon, so maybe there's a little something in there for the ballad fans.
One song we didn't touch on is Boys Will Be Boys.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, such a powerful moment at the end of the record. And I heard you say it to, I think it was Laura Snapes at The Guardian, saying that it was supposed to be like that moment where the lights turn on at the end of the club. and there's this kind of like shock that happens at the end of the evening. But it's a song, you know, that is cutting in terms of its focus on inequality for women. But the thing that I find interesting about it is the way that it's done with humor.
Yeah.
And some of the lyrics are pretty sarcastic and pretty cutting in certain kinds of ways. Was that deliberate?
There's a book that I read by a feminist author called Roxane Gay, and it's called Bad Feminist. And she kind of just talks about, you know, being able to you know, talk about equality, but also at the same time, you know, poke fun at it. And also it's another way of also just coming to terms with your like sexuality and your feminism, and not taking yourself too seriously in the sense of like, well, I'm a feminist and blah, 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 like you should do what I say. And, you know, it's, you know, you should treat women with respect, and which you should, but it's in a way where it's a little bit tongue in cheek and makes the whole thing a little bit more maybe digestible for people. And, you know, these are all personal experiences. I feel like because I talk so much about female inequality, I felt like I'd be doing maybe a disservice to myself if I don't talk about it in some way or another. And I just, you know, it was very much me talking about an experience, a few experiences, but there was one in particular where I was coming home from school one night in London, and it's literally like a 3-minute walk from the bus stop to my apartment at the time. And there's always sometimes boys in the corner of like the street, and I'd get so nervous that I'd either put my keys between my knuckles like I'm Wolverine to just like protect myself because I have no idea, I'm so little and I'm just like running to get home, or I'd pretend that I was on the phone. And these I feel like are very real things in order to like protect yourself or make it feel like you're on the phone to someone, or even just like, you know, so people know that you're in contact with someone, or if something happens, you know, it's less likely to happen almost. But sometimes you have to talk about certain things in like a cutting but lighthearted way, because sometimes the memories can also be like a little bit too scary and painful and make it seem super dramatic almost, and that's not what I want it to feel like. And it's more just a conversation starter, you know, for my younger audience, to just be like, okay, how do we make young women feel more comfortable? What do we have to change? You know, because so much is you know, us having to go home before midnight, whereas boys can stay out much later, and we have to, you know, take care of so many other things to make sure that we stay safe and looked after, that boys never really have to think about. And also at the fact of like, boys will be boys but girls will be women. That's not a statement that I feel all the way through, that all boys are like, you know, silly and they you know, poke fun at girls, or they aren't honest and truthful. There are so many incredible men, but that's why I felt like it needed to be a little bit lighthearted, because it's not directed at every single person. You know, I'm not, although it's kind of generalizing, I'm not trying to generalize.
But it could have been an inspirational song, right? A kind of inspirational anthem. To me, what it does, I think, is it reveals the asymmetrical power relationships that are out there between men and women. Mm-hmm. But it does it in a way that doesn't prescribe. It doesn't say, well, this is how you fix it, or this is the way that we get to the future. It simply acknowledges
the problem and acknowledges the problem. Exactly.
Yeah. And so what do you mean by the kids ain't all right? Because that's in the chorus, and that, I think that lyric is really important.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, the things that, you know, we see on TV, or the way the media kind of project certain things, I think have been very much imprinted on how a woman should be, or the way we should act, or the how to be more of a lady, or how to like look after yourself, or things that you should do that men never really have to think about. And I think that's the kind of thing that no matter how much you feel like you don't want to think about it, it's always somehow ingrained into your head that you have to be a certain way. And I think that's what I mean by the kids aren't all right. No matter how much, you know, you feel like you're not affected by it, still to a certain degree, there are so many things that I feel like we have to unlearn in order to you know, be ourselves and come into so much confidence about our sexuality and the way that we are as women. You know, don't wear your short too skirt because then people won't take you seriously, or if you're doing this, you know, it's very much about being in control of your own body and femininity, and all those things that come with that, I think, are incredibly important lessons that, you know, the media isn't always right, and sometimes we need to get away from all the things that we've been taught for so long.
And it also, I think, kind of sidesteps the thinking that, you know, it will get better, you know, which is a term that obviously has had particular resonance for queer communities for a long time. But in pop music scholarship, there's this idea of resilience. A lot of great scholars have written about this, Robin James, among others, which is the idea that, like, what you're supposed to do is bounce back from trauma, or bounce back from harm, or bounce back from abuse, and just pick yourself up by your bootstraps and, like, make it work for yourself no matter what. And you see this resonating in popular music, whether it's songs by an artist like Sia, incredible songs like Titanium or Bulletproof, that you're, as a woman, I believe you're expected to be sort of bulletproof and bounce back from any kind of trauma that you run into. I think you've had some songs that I would classify as kind of resilient songs that are sort of bouncing back from relationship drama or that kind of thing. But I feel like Boys Will Be Boys is a little bit different, because it's not saying, hey, you're going to bounce back. It's saying, look, there's an issue.
Yeah.
Resolving it.
I think that's, you know, I think also so many women, I think even in this day and age, like, we feel like we need to have a more, like, masculine energy and kind of like that kind of resilience in what you're saying, that we feel like we need to have that kind of energy to be taken really seriously, and that sometimes being vulnerable or being feminine is seen as being vulnerable. And I think there's a lot of strength in that. I think that's something that both men and women have to have. I think femininity is very, very important, and feminine energy is incredibly important, to also be in touch with your feelings, and to, you know, there are so many things, even in, you know, it's a big part of almost toxic masculinity, in the sense that you aren't able to talk about your emotions and the things that you're feeling because you feel like you have to be a certain way. And that's also another thing that's painted by the media, and that I think we need to start breaking all these boundaries in general, so that we're both seen equally, and that we can move forward as a community, as people, into seeing that you know, the sexes are equal.
To date, you haven't made a lot of music that's explicitly confessional, right? That's like autobiographical about your life per se. Would you agree with that, or is that a fair assessment?
You're saying that I haven't?
That you haven't. No, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just that I think a lot of women in popular music are sort of expected to do music that is about what they've gone through from an autobiographical perspective. And a lot of your music is not necessarily that. Is that a deliberate choice?
I think, I mean, all of my songs really come from things that have happened to me. They're all very autobiographical, but done in a way where I can still tell the story but still make a catchy pop song. Still, like, it's kind of walking the line between those two things. And I think, you know, a lot of the time people ask me, like, oh, aren't you scared if somebody knows if this song is, like, written about them or whatever? And I'm just like, you know, art is meant to be subjective. I never write things in the sense that they're too detailed for that person to ever know. But it's there if they know the experience, then it's then it will make basically perfect sense. But I think it's very much in the sense of we go through all the same things in one way or another. You know, my experiences aren't so different from your experiences, and that's something that I try and, like, put at the forefront of it, that we can all relate and do the same thing, and you know, if I'm doing it, you can do it too.
Yeah, by the way, I look at that as a positive thing. I think one of the kind of traps for women in popular music has been this whole thing of you've got to fight as women, and then let's go to the album and see how you resolve it on the record. Yeah. And you're not doing any of that. The focus is on the songs, on the songwriting, on the production, on the quality of your voice, and you're there, but it's not like a tabloid reveal, right? That's
Yeah, no, and I don't love that stuff. I want the songs to be great. I never want my personal life to be like the driving force for a song to be successful. And never. I never want to put those two things together unless it just so happens that, something happens and people pick up on it. But that is never my like driving force for my music. I just want to make good songs, things that are, that mean to me, that means something to me. But at the same time, I'm not trying to stir some shit, basically, is the main thing. But it's also some artists, part of their growth is the way that you see, especially female artists, where they go from like a girl to a woman to, your experiences and what's happening. I also, although I feel like I was still young when I started putting out music at 19, I felt like my just experiences as a woman haven't changed so much from then till now, and that I'm, it's not so much like being treated as like a teen pop star and then being treated as like, oh, she's a woman now. Do you know what I mean? So I think still early days. Who knows what I'm going to write about next? But so far,
the Dua Lipa Diary will be the next
Dua Lipa Diary. That's where I'm at right now.
This has been a historic year, partly because of the pandemic crisis, obviously, but also because of the racial justice crisis that started in the United States but has been experienced all over the world. A lot of your music is rooted in Black musical culture and Black musical style, whether we're talking about R&B or house music and so on. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about this year of activism, and also how the protests that we've seen since the summer have changed the way that you've thought about race and you've thought about how race works in your own music.
Yeah. Well, I think this year in particular, everybody's been at home, so everybody's been really focused on what has been happening on social media and seeing the very disturbing videos that has been happening to, George Floyd, and talking about Breonna Taylor and all the police incidents that have happened, especially this year. But this is a problem that's been happening for a very long time. And it's been something that maybe hasn't been at the forefront of everyone's mind because people haven't seen it. And now that it's, now that everybody is seeing it and taking a moment to really see what's going on, I think people are really taking a stand and really pushing forward for more equality. I think for a lot of people, especially friends in my circle, it's whether it's talking about race or whether it's talking about politics, you're always surrounded by people that think the same as you. So you're in your bubble and you're like, I can't believe this is happening, but you can't say I can't believe this is happening because these things have been happening in the UK as they're happening in the US, but they've not been at the forefront and not been positioned in the way that they are now. And I think this has been a long time coming, especially with the protests, that we all need as people, as a society, to really see what's going on, to really understand the police brutality that's happening all over the world and what we can do to change it, to fix it, to make our voices be heard, to not allow this to carry on, because it's there's so much pain going on in the world, and we all want to be treated equally. And and in terms of music, I believe that I guess every artist should be championed and recognized for all their efforts and the inspiration where it comes from. And I think especially those artists like myself that do take inspiration from Black music and Black culture, I think it's incredibly important to take a stand and speak up about things that are very important, to use your platform and to make sure that your voice is heard. I have my platform for a reason, and that's because of all the fans that have been supporting me, and that I feel like I'm also a voice not just for myself but for others as well. And that's something that's very important to me and very close to my heart, and I'm never afraid of being outspoken, and I feel like I've said this so much, I'm always up for learning and understanding more and seeing ways that I can help and use my platform and my privilege to be able to speak up about the things that are happening in the world and the injustices that need to be fixed. And that's something that's very close to my heart. And, I'll do whatever it takes to hopefully see a change in the world we live in right now.
There are a lot of attempts also within the music industry to do like reparative justice or to give back to artists who, maybe they weren't paid in terms of the royalties, or maybe they were exploited. So there's an attempt by some to go back and look at those histories, but also by record labels right now to either, donate money to social justice organizations or to kind of give aspect of their profits to those organizations, whatever the case may be. Have you thought about doing those kinds of things too in terms of using your platform? If you haven't, it's okay. I'm just wondering how.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Especially, I think, to be honest, I think everybody in general, we should have at least tried to have paid attention to this prior to it happening on social media and everybody seeing it. And I'm glad that everybody's up on their feet and making a difference and donating to these organizations and supporting young Black-owned businesses and Black LGBTQ charities and all these institutions that are so incredibly important that maybe we wouldn't have found out about them prior unless you purposely went in and like started looking into different organizations. And I definitely use my platform and my social media to champion new charities all the time and organizations, whether that's about Black Lives Matter or Know Your Rights Camp or the LGBTQ, the Trevor Project, and so many others, especially during this time, like the Black Farmers community and all these communities that really need our help and support during this time. But something that we should be making a habit of is something that I'm doing, is something that I've made the intention to make a habit of it, to constantly go in and give and do charity and champion it on my platform and try and make a difference in whatever way I can.
My last area of inquiry, the last thing I want to ask you about has to do with your fans. I remember when I interviewed you before for NPR, I was so amazed that your fans followed you everywhere. You had this like core group. This is early in your career, but you had this core group of fans, and in New York, they went everywhere that you went, and they kind of knew about the things you were going to do before you did, and they talked to you online and so on, and you had a really interesting and intimate relationship with your fans. I assume that may still be the case, but you're in a different place now as an artist, and I want to think about this thing that's described in pop music scholarship as relational labor. There's a scholar named Nancy Bain who talks about the way that artists in the age of social media have to do a lot of labor that isn't really paid for necessarily, which is social media labor, to keep these relationships alive with fans. Some of that is pleasurable work, but it's also work. It takes time, it takes energy, and so on. You mentioned before about dancing and how there was like a criticism online you have to deal with and you have to adjust to. There's also been some moments that have been a little more touchy. The tweet in which people accuse you of being in support of Albanian nationalism and so on, which you handled and took care of or talked about or responded to. So I just want to know what you think about the work that you do to cultivate and keep relationships up with your fans, and how you go about doing that, and how much time a day do you spend doing that? How do you think about that work as a pop star?
Well, social media has always been a massive part of my life since I was a kid. Like I feel like I've grown up with it, and so that's always been something quite easy and quite pleasurable for me. In the sense that I enjoy, communicating with fans and still having those relationships, but those have kind of moved on from Twitter to Instagram more so, because Twitter just became quite difficult for me. There just came a point where I felt like I wasn't reaching my fullest potential because I was worrying too much about what other people were saying or what other people were thinking. And in order for me to, you know, grow as an artist and be myself and not be afraid of, you know, the next jump in my career or what I'm about to do next, I needed to take a step back from that. And so what I was going to do, of course, now that tour isn't happening, but I'm still in the process of creating a fan club, in the sense of I can have, you know, fans send letters and I can send letters back. And that way, if somebody actually wants to send me hate mail, it's a whole nother thing. I'm like, okay, I'm going to read it this time because your criticism is important, clearly, and needs to be written down and mailed to me. So I will take it on that. But I feel like that could be a way to kind of get away from any negativity that I feel like happens a lot because it's so accessible on the computer to just like hide behind a screen and be able to say whatever you think or whatever you want to people, even though you don't know them personally, you don't know what affects them, you don't know how they would feel, but nobody thinks about that, or whether that you know, I'm a real person with real feelings and maybe my feelings might get hurt, or, you know, it's very like playground thing. So I've had to kind of take a step back in certain ways with social media, but at the same time, you know, trying to create as many exciting experiences for fans and do something different, whether that's even what I've done so far is create pretty much 2 music videos per song with like things that I feel can be really engaging and fun for fans. And I'm like, in this way, I just constantly keep giving, you know, back in a way. And, you know, that makes me happy. And I get really nice messages about it. So I'm happy about that too. But in the sense of, you know, being outspoken and talking about things that are very important to me, I think, especially when you're in the, you know, in the public eye, I think words can be twisted very easily by, you know, other people, in the sense to make me seem like the bad guy, and that's something that I just have to deal with and also understand that it's just the way it is. Not everybody's going to agree with something that I say. I never ever intend to be malicious or mean or say things that, you know, upset people, but I also every single day I get told a lot of mean things that I feel like I suck up, and I don't, you know, I hold in a lot of the time. And sometimes I have to speak my truth and speak things that are important to me. Sometimes I get myself into trouble because I feel like maybe I don't execute it the way that I should have. But at the same time, I you know, I stand firmly with things that I believe in, especially in terms of equality and treating people the same and allowing people to be proud of where they're from. And, you know, we have to live our truth. It's the most important thing, you know.
Nuance doesn't do very well on social media.
No, it doesn't.
One of the things that also fascinated me about getting to actually meet some of your fans very early on in the process was that they were young, but you were also young, and you were relatively, I mean, they were, let's say, maybe 5 to 7 years younger than you, but there was a proximity there, and I think they saw you, they treated you with a certain kind of familiarity, partly because you were young and they were young in a certain way, as opposed to if there was a 20-year gap or something, an age gap. And have you thought about the ways in which your fans kind of grow old with you? Not that you're old at all, but they grow up with you. They mature while you mature too.
Yeah, I think about that a lot. You know, I think as much as I have lots of mums and dads come up to me and they're like, my 7-year-old daughter just loves your music, and I get really excited. I also know from fans that come to the shows and stuff that they are pretty much the same age as me. And I think that's also just a big part of like the music that I write, in the sense of I feel like the experience of growing up, I feel like, is shared. And so those songs also, I feel like, resonate with my fans a lot of the time, but also open me up to new audiences of all ages. And, you know, Man, all I want to do is just make music that makes people happy. And if I can hit all the age ranges and make everyone dance, I've definitely done my job. So that's my ultimate goal.
I think you've done a great job of that this year, in a year where we needed it really badly. You delivered. You really did. Dua Lipa, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Jason. I appreciate you so much. Can't believe it's been so long since we last spoke.
It has been.
I'm really happy we got to do this again.
Thank you, Dua.
Thank you
Thanks for
so
closing
much.
out the pop conference. Thank you.